it feels like, I don't know if this is true or not, there's not quantitative, but it feels like 80% of the conversations around AI are around how we can do more with less, right? How we can use the technology to have fewer employees, how we can use the technology to have more streamlined process. But it's all some version of, can we do more with less? I think the opportunity is as much about what are the new things we can do that we couldn't do before. And I think 5 years from now, that's what you're going to start to see.
Welcome to What If with Leslie Grandy. Scarcity used to sit in the mechanics of making things. Bandwidth, distribution deals, and production budgets determined what could exist and who would see it. As those constraints loosen, the center of gravity moves. When creation becomes easier, value shifts towards judgment, timing, and relevance. That shift is reshaping how innovation actually happens. For years, innovation was often equated with breakthrough production or technical capability. Now, the harder problem is deciding what deserves to be built at all. When tools can generate, produce, and distribute at extraordinary speed, the differentiator is no longer access to technology. It's the ability to recognize where leverage lives, where audiences are moving, and which ideas will still matter once the novelty fades. Before, the question was whether something could be made and shipped at scale. Now, the question becomes, what if it should exist in the first place, and who is it truly for? Artificial intelligence accelerates this transition, but it also complicates it. Every major technology wave moves through recognizable phases. First, something becomes possible. Then people experiment to understand what it's good for. Only later do reliability and scale follow. Much of what feels chaotic now reflects that middle phase where organizations are experimenting in public, learning through use, and trying to build foundations while the technology itself is still evolving. As production becomes more fluid, innovation no longer lives in one obvious place. It is less about breakthrough launches and more about the decisions surrounding what is now possible and how it reaches people. Stories, products, and services begin to function less like fixed outputs and more like adaptable frameworks. Innovation becomes a continuous process of iteration and alignment with changing audience expectations rather than a single act of creation. My guest, Scott Ehrlich, has spent his career navigating moments exactly like this, working at the intersection of media, technology, and business model innovation through multiple platform transitions. That vantage point gives him a long view on how innovation actually unfolds inside real organizations. His experience reflects a different rhythm of innovation than the one we often celebrate. It's less about chasing spectacle and more about placing thoughtful bets, building foundations that allow experimentations to scale, and recognizing when a shift in technology signals a deeper shift in behavior. In a period defined by rapid change and constant novelty, his perspective offers a grounded look at how to innovate with discipline, curiosity, and a clear sense of where meaningful advantage is beginning to form. I hope you enjoy this episode. My guest today is Scott Ehrlich, a seasoned media executive and founder whose career spans broadcast media, streaming services, and digital platforms. He currently serves as the Chief Innovation Officer and Head of Corporate Strategy at Sinclair Broadcast Group, where he leads enterprise-wide innovation across AI, OTA networks, FAST channels, and OTT services. Prior to Sinclair, Scott founded Agility Studios, producing award-winning digital franchises, including the Legion of Extraordinary Dancers, and he co-founded QU Media, which pioneered curated television networks built entirely from internet-native content. Earlier in his career, he helped build one of the industry's earliest OTT subscription services at RealNetworks, and he held senior roles at News Corp, NBC, and Rivals.com. Scott is known for bridging creative vision with operational execution and guiding organizations through platform transitions. I also have had the good fortune to call Scott my manager for a few years in the early 2000s, and I was lucky enough to have interviewed Scott for my book, Creative Velocity. You've been very inspirational to me, Scott, throughout my career. So I'm really delighted to welcome you to the podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me. There was a lot of acronyms in there.
I know. One of my favorite things that you taught me is that a strategy without leverage isn't really a strategy. I always remember that. And when building and production become easier, where does the real leverage come from for legacy media companies trying to stay relevant and rise above all the noise from the content that's just now flooded, including the AI slop that's joining in?
Well, let's take it from the artist perspective, from the storyteller's perspective. I think one of the constraints in creativity for most of my career, right, has been the actual production process. The actual process of an artist having an idea, being able to communicate that idea to tradespeople who then make that idea come to life for a piece of filmed entertainment. I had the great pleasure of working with John Chu, the director, on a project about 15 years ago. And John creates these amazing storyboards for his movies. And they have, incredible detail from his vision for what the scene should be. And he spends a lot of time on them, right? Painstakingly crafting those details. I mean, they're really beautiful. But in a world of AI, the amount of time he spends on them does a few things. A, it makes them beautiful, right? But B, the longer an artist spends on a version of a vision, the more locked in they get to that vision. And so what they're not doing is they're not iterating. And so the creative process with AI, you can still do all of those things, but you can do it so much faster that you can iterate and you don't get quite as stuck on the version that you're spending your time on. And whether that's good or bad, I think maybe a matter of perspective, but I think that's how it changes, right? Is the artist can iterate more. The producers can iterate more than you could in the old days because it was just too expensive.
Got it. Yeah. So the leverage then comes in the actual caliber of the story. Is that where the leverage, what can you still bank on when you can get it out faster? Maybe it's not as beautiful, but is there still leverage in doing that? Like what's the strategy that comes from the leverage point in that expeditious production value?
So I don't know that we know yet. I mean, short answer, I don't think we know yet. Like there hasn't been enough produced in this world yet, right? For us to really know. The AI native studios are a new thing. The chief AI officer at a big movie studio is a new thing. We'll start to see the product of those people's work in the next, probably the end of this year, starting next year. And then we'll start to know. But I think ultimately it goes back to the viewer, because I'll stick with what I was trying to say before, which is right now it is very hard for me as a producer, distributor to get the right piece of content to the right person at the right moment, on the right platform, in the right mood. AI makes it a lot easier because I know a lot more about people. I can customize content a lot more fluidly. And I think what you'll start to see is you'll start to see different forms of storytelling emerging. So I'll give you an example. I think I've run into 3,750 people that are using AI to write a children's book. That seems to be the activity of the month. All right, cool. I think that's a really interesting idea. But that doesn't take any advantage of what AI can do. That's taking today's publishing model and just saying more people can be writers of children's books. All right, cool. But to your point, there's no additional leverage there. They're just, okay, you can make more of them faster. I guess that's interesting. But I looked at that and I went, actually, you know what you could do is you could go into the AI and you can say, this is my kid. This is what he's good at. This is what he's not good at. This is where the teachers are saying he's having trouble learning. And the AI can create a children's book for that child that is customized to that child's way of learning, that child's way of understanding, a specific challenge that child is trying to overcome that you can help them navigate through storytelling. And I think that's incredibly exciting because the leverage point then goes back to the actual user to be able to sort of have a lot more control over what it is they're consuming, how they're consuming it, what role that plays in their life. Today is still very much, did somebody in the morning editorial meeting think that was a news story or not? And that's where I think, the democratization of the content starts to happen is that the AI can allow us in a much more precise way to shape, mold the content to get it to the right person at the right time.
And I think what's leveraged in that, as I'm hearing you talk about it, in the sense that it becomes more valuable if you can reach that person with a product that they feel meets them and meets their problem. And at scale, doing that before AI, it was really hard to do that because there were always different contexts for the different circumstances that that parent might bring about their child, right? And so rather than trying to segment all kids, this takes that off the plate, right? You don't have to do the segmentation. You just have to create the tools that allow people to self-segment, is what I hear you saying. And that's the leverage.
And if you look at sort of like how the intellectual property kind of manifests and becomes valuable, right, it starts to be different. And so I worked with a company called iFilm years ago, right, our friend Blair, and we sold it to Viacom. And we were super excited. iFilm was like an early kind of user-generated video platform. And we're like, okay, well, now we're part of Viacom. We can go get Beavis and Butthead, which was like the big show on MTV at the time. And we can go to the creators and we can get the raw assets of that show and we can let people make their own Beavis and Butthead episode. Now, in 2005, that was very hard to do for any number of reasons, not the least of which was the army between the creators and anybody who wanted to do anything with their content. Now, you have digital native creators who embrace this kind of thing. You have digital native consumers who embrace this kind of thing. And I think what you'll see is you'll see content development go from I need to make a TV show to I need characters in a story framework. And the rest actually gets filled in by the user, the AI, and other things. But the value is characters, worlds, and story arcs.
So a couple things out of what I heard you say. First, I think being able to get to an audience has gotten easier, just like getting something built is easier. But what isn't necessarily easier is creating quality, meaningful content that audiences want. So that didn't necessarily get made easier. And so in that scenario, part of getting to the quality content that audience wants may be this kind of personalization step or this sort of customization step, right? The customer can customize the content in the context that they need it. And so that's that sort of next hurdle of mass appeal in a niche way, right? So the leverage is actually flipping the assumption that you have to have one broadcast level audience, and then you have to appeal to as many of those people as you can. Now you're kind of flipping that assumption that that's not the goal, that the goal is to create something that can appeal to as many people as possible because they have more control of how they receive it, how they view it, how they, what matters to them when they look at that story. Is that fair?
Yeah, you widen your net by a lot. If you look at kind of video games, right? That's basically what video games are. They're creating characters and worlds, and you go and interact. And the story that gets told is sort of in the background, right? Because it's more about what I'm doing in the game world, right? But if you go into just a pure storytelling mode, take it out of the game world, and now I'm just I'm along for the ride. It's a passive experience like consuming content. Maybe there's some engagement opportunities if I'm the right person to engage, right? But the AI will know, okay, this is somebody who wants a passive story. This is somebody who wants an engaged story. It might be the same story underneath, but you're sort of almost, you can look at it either way, right? You're either building into storytelling from the video game world, or you're taking storytelling closer to the video game world. But that's the convergence that you see happening. Like no two players have the same experience in a round of any particular game, right? World of Warcraft down to Pokemon Go, right? Whatever it is, you're driving your own experience. And I think as that moves into storytelling, and you've seen these games go from, their twitchy games to like, friends of mine wrote the Assassin's Creed game, like they're movie writers, right? That's what they do. That level of storytelling with that level of personalization creates a completely new experience that will satisfy people in a different way. And if you're coming from, like my kids are gamers, right? From the game world, that will be a more engaging experience to them. By and large, they're their early 20s. If you put a movie in front of them, 2.5, the first thing that goes, so you want me to stare at a screen for 2 hours? That's not really where they are. On the other hand, if I could take those characters and put it in an experience that is wrapped for them to consume in their lives in the way it makes sense, then they'll be all over.
What's also changed in that story is their expectation that content should adapt to them. That's what you're saying, is that their affinity towards the way they interact with games has created an expectation that the content, right, adapts to what their particular storyline, what their character vision is, right? And so in that scenario, when a story is kind of held tight to a singular storyline, it may seem a little less relevant or resonant.
And it may not even be the storyline per se. It may mean, hey, I got to tell this story to this person in 8 minutes. This person wants a more detailed story.
So it's really breaking the whole notion of what content stories have to be, from when we thought of, half hour, an hour broadcast television and 2-hour movies, to not just, digestible social media content, but just even storytelling and entertainment having to be more flexible and adaptive to what the audience is now moving towards in terms of their expectation, especially as they become AI content creators themselves. Even if they're not quality creators, they have the expectation, they have that control, that ability, right, to produce that content. And so that kind of takes me also, those people, your children in Pacific, are going to be entering the workforce as more AI native, right? And also a different kind of consumer than when you started your journey in media, right? And so as a leader, right, the audience is changing, but so are your employees, right? Their interests, their risk profiles, their adaptability, right, their attention span, all of that is changing. What do you envision being the really most important shift for media companies to recognize as the balance of people become employees that are AI native, right? As more of those enter the workforce, what's gonna really be the tension that's gonna have to get resolved for media companies?
Business model. My entire career, our business model has been some version of you pay us a fee and we sell ads, right? Either we got paid by the cable operators or we got paid for a subscription, and we sold ads. But that all required you coming to my stage, whether my stage was a television channel, a website, or something else. It required you coming to my stage. What we're seeing happening now, which is both exciting and terrifying, is the chat interfaces, the OpenAIs, the Claudes, they're becoming operating systems. And you're seeing more and more applications go inside of them. You're seeing more and more content go inside of them. And that business model has yet to emerge. And I think that's the thing that we're all really focused on is I know how I get paid if you go to Google, you search for news in Seattle, and it sends you to one of our websites. I got ads on that page. I got ads on a video. I know how I get paid. But if you go to ChatGPT and it gives you the result of that news item, it's still my content, but I don't know how I'm getting paid for that. As that gets resolved, as that business model concern gets resolved, it will inevitably manifest into some of the consumer experience. And I think that's where that kind of gets figured out, which is not really an answer to your question, more like the framework for the answer to your question, right?
I think what I'm reading into that answer, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, is that you're suggesting the people who are prepared to take on those new business models are going to be the AI native employees who consume differently today and might drive the shift in business models within those organizations. You're listening to What If with Leslie Grandy. If you want to activate your imagination and build your creative muscles, I've put together some free resources, including webinars, downloadable content, bonus book content, and even a GPT to help you achieve your goals. Access these free tools to start asking what if today at lesliegrandy.com/resources.
I don't know if it's our AI native employees or just, frankly, the overwhelming scale of the user bases of these new platforms, right? What's the user number for ChatGPT? Like 800 million people or something ridiculous? It's like, I mean, we deployed ChatGPT because 90% of the people at the company were already using it. And so you just, okay, great, we'll move to the enterprise version. That'll be cool. I think it's the actual platforms themselves that are going to drive this change. Like, I don't think it's our employees. Our employees, are certainly part of it. But I think the AI native employee is going to more drive change at internal process than probably consumption. Consumption, I still think it's just going to be driven by the scale of the platforms, because media tends to go where their most eyeballs are, right? So there's an old saying, when content in its native state seeks ubiquity. And it's true. Outside of sports content, which is more acquisition content in its native form seeks ubiquity. Like, my version of the news story is the one I want everybody to watch, but there's 5 versions of the news story, or nowadays 500 versions of the news story.
I hear what you're saying, which is you're mostly thinking about the platforms and the business model changes that will emerge from that ubiquity and that grades of value, right? How big the audiences are that are worth monetizing. But as you're looking for people even to work on that, right, the operational efficiency and the streamlined distribution models and all of that, what type of employee, what are the traits? Because they're no longer doing those, tasks that were boring that can be automated. They're no longer doing sort of the process work that you had to have them do. There was a whole lot of people who were kind of capable handlers, shall we say, right? Knew what that step required, performed the activities in that step, and then handed it off to another specialist in another step. But now, right, you're going to see the efficiency of having AI move those things through the handlers, agents providing basic value that those people did before. So what is it that employees in these organizations are going to need to really bring to the table?
I'll go back like 3 years ago when we started to make the transition from AI as something we were thinking about and talking about to stuff we were actively doing. One of the mandates I got was, hey, let's go hire a big time AI person. As a recruiting process, probably the most frustrating one I've had in my career. Trying to find the right AI person in a world where AI people were really valuable. Nobody understood their skill sets, and the specialization that inevitably was going to show up hadn't shown up yet. And I came away from that and I sat down with my bosses and I was like, listen, I think the idea that we can hire the right AI person is really, really hard to buy into. You got to find the right person. You got to have from them the right skill set, and they have to understand your business. And what I came away with was, I don't think I can find that person. And if I do, I was just getting lucky. But I do have a bunch of people that we have invested time, money, other resources into learning how our business works. So rather than trying to find the right AI person to graft onto our business, I started to look around and try to find the right person in our business to go teach them AI.
And what were the signals you were looking for in that person? So when you would go search for that amongst this,
somebody was creative. I already had a labs team, and so was the leader of the labs team. So somebody already demonstrated that they were willing to and comfortable working out on the edge of a limb with no net. It was more about that than anything else. And then as we've gone along, and now as we've rolled out more AI tooling, that same story is playing out again and again and again, right? So the McKinsey study from last year that was 95% of AI things are failing. Well, part of the reason they're failing is people are doing the wrong thing, right? They're not sort of embracing the mundane. Everybody wants to I cut 50% of my workforce and turned it off to, that doesn't really happen in scaled up companies. Not today. Someday it will, but not today. Today, what we can do is, there's that stat that American knowledge workers spend 25% of their time looking for files. Well, anybody who's ever tried to do a search in Outlook knows it doesn't work. ChatGPT Enterprise connected to Outlook fixes that. So, okay, cool. Pick up 20% of people's time. I'll do that all day long and twice on Sundays as long as the numbers work. And it's more that. It's more applying AI to existing workflow. That's what we're doing today. And we're making those workflows more efficient because we're applying AI to existing workflows. Once you do that, then you can start to actually transform the workflows themselves. But if you're trying to keep the plate spinning in an operating business, right, you can't let them drop. And so sort of like wholesale, now we do it completely differently, really, really hard. But this idea of kind of right, just step by step, incrementally moving up the ladder, that's actually been working and working well.
And so how do you motivate people to keep iterating at that small level rather than, being discouraged at the rate of progress? What, as a leader, right, that's trying to balance the pressure of revenue and the business that you have today, like you said, the plates that are spinning, and the opportunity that you see, not just from the labs, but your own trend spotting. How do you keep people from feeling discouraged at the rate of innovation is and what it could be in order to be a true competitive advantage for the company?
Well, first, I think it is actually a true competitive advantage because in our stodgy old industry, we are actually moving further and faster than other people. But also, people will look at ChatGPT and say, well, that's not particularly sexy, right? Not like automating data entry or something. Maybe not, right? And we're going to get to those other things too, right? But the thing you can do and know it will yield significant ROI today is actually much more mundane than people want to think. But your question is, how do you keep people engaged, right? There's two answers to that. One is, how do you keep the people that you report up to engaged, right? Who are like, hey, I'd really like something for the next quarterly announcement that sounds a little better than ChatGPT. All right, cool, I got that. But also the people who are doing the work. Now, I tend to focus more on the people who do the work. I'm notoriously horrible at managing up. But for the people who are doing the work, I think that's actually easier, because if you sit down with anybody and say, what's the thing you do every single day that you absolutely hate doing? And then the next thing you say is, what if I can make it so you no longer have to do that? Or instead of spending 2 hours doing that, we can make it 15 minutes. And that's when you get people engaged. That's when you get people leaning in. When you say, hey, listen, the part of your job where we both know you add no value and it's just toil, that's what we're going to take away. And so that's really what we've done internally, is we focused on this mantra of eliminate the toil of work. And I didn't originate that. I stole it from somebody I was on a panel with, but I love it, right? And that keeps people incredibly motivated, because nobody likes populating the CRM. They like talking to clients, right? And so when I go to salespeople and say, my goal is to get you to the point where you spend 80% of your time talking to clients and reduce the toil of your job to 20% or less. And now I have their attention, because talking to more customers means probably they make more money, means probably their job's easier, means they're probably having more fun, and they're spending less time with their hands on the keyboard and more time interacting. And that hasn't been a hard sell so far.
And so does leadership, again, managing up when the board is looking for something novel or innovative to call attention to, what you described sounds really awesome for employees. Is it meet that bar where you're saying we're just getting more efficient, we're getting more effective, we're turning people from doing mundane tasks into people who are more strategic? Does that win? Does that really sell the effort?
Not always. Being able to quantify the gains, right? That definitely helps. But also being able to demonstrate sort of parallel progress on some of the sexier projects. But at the same time, be able to say, okay, look, we're building this foundation with what may seem like more mundane technology, but in truth, what that more mundane technology can actually do is a lot more. And as you kind of walk up that ladder, they start to go, oh, okay, now I get it, right? But you have to do, you kind of have to do both. I just came to the conclusion that I didn't think you could deploy really high-end agentic solutions without first putting a just basic foundation of AI literacy in place for the vast majority of the employee base.
When you said that, it made me wonder, this is such a different approach for you. This is such a different measured approach to sort of build the right foundation. And then from that, do the experimentation and exploration. And I think that makes total sense with AI. How is that arc different?
Yeah, definitely different, right? Because in those days, the spectacle was the objective. And sort of whether it was my role at News Corp or really what RealNetworks was oriented as a company, right? The spectacle in many times was the message. Hey, we can do this now. Now I look at it and a few decades later and kind of look at it and go, okay, there's some predictable stages here, right? There's first, make it exist. Second, figure out what it's good for. Third, figure out how to make it do that thing reliably. And then fourth, scale. And certainly earlier in my career, I didn't understand that as well. And so in streaming, I wanted to go straight from it exists to scale, missing those two interim steps. And now I look at it and I can look at AI and say, okay, I get why this is a little bit chaotic, because they're still in the make it exist and figure out what it's good for. Then we'll move into the, okay, now that we know what it's good for, let's make it do those things reliably and then scale. So when I look at sort of the overall picture, I do have a different point of view as to like where we are in the arc of this thing rolling out. Then certainly I had in streaming where it was just sort of, okay, let's just keep going, right? I think that is kind of the challenge with this wave, though, is with streaming, right? Remember I said earlier, I was like a decade ahead of schedule, right? I thought broadband was going to be everywhere in 98. And it turned out it was 2008, 2010 that it really got everywhere. This is moving a lot faster. It's still going through those stages, but the unpredictable thing is just how fast. Because every once in a while, which in AI seems to be about every 3 months, there's a discontinuous thing that happens, right? The thing with OpenClaw, Moltbot, Claudebot, whatever you want to call it, right? That whatever, just a couple of weeks old now, that changed the arc of the curve. And we still don't understand how yet. But for sure, that's going to affect the timing of how all this plays out.
Especially that example you just gave, that the experimentation as product is more accepted now than it was during the streaming era. I think people were more fearful of the experimentation as product, right? But somebody's going to today let go of a malt bot or a Claude bot and put it out in the wild to see what it is, to see what it becomes, to see whether there's a there. And so in that sense, I think for someone in your lane, somebody with that sort of curiosity and desire for exploration and experimentation around new things, this probably is a different way of approaching where you go with what's available to you than it was back then, because I think things didn't come to market as quickly and you had less choices. Now, next week, something else might get your attention, right? There's another thing. So as the kind of, innovation leader that you are, what signals are you looking for when the next shiny thing shows up as to whether you spend time on it? Like, yeah, you're going to be curious, you're going to go investigate it, but what are the signals around which ones you move with or which ones you pick up and explore more deeply through experimentation? Because that wasn't present in the streaming era. Well, we didn't have those kinds of, oh, something showed up next week that's threatening our idea of what we should be doing. It didn't happen that way, but now it is. So how are you picking and choosing?
So one of the things that's different about this, about AI versus, streaming or HTML or any of the sort of internet-based technologies that we were used to, is the way you learn how to use them is by using them. Not everybody wants to accept that. Particularly big at scale companies who are used to sort of just rolling out a new workflow and a new tool, and you do training and right. These tools don't work that way. Like, in order to find out the best way for Department X to use AI, I need them to be using AI. And I need to find that person in that department that gets it. And so far, we've been very lucky, right? You find somebody who gets it, and it's easy for me. I can look at the stats of who's using ChatGPT and at what levels and how many messages they're sending, and are they using custom GPTs? And I can go, okay, cool, that's my person. And okay, then it's a matter of extracting from them. How are you using it? What benefits are you getting? And then codifying that in a way, maybe it's a custom GPT, maybe it's something else, and then rolling it out to everybody else who's got that job function. But I need the person who's doing the job to have that aha moment of how they can use the tool to do their job better before I can sort of take the next step as an organization. And whereas with the streaming stuff, or really most traditional technology, the engineers build it to the specs of the product managers, right? And then the product marketing people take it and off they go. This doesn't work that way because nobody knows how to tell a traffic assistant. And traffic is how we get ads on TV. Nobody can tell a traffic assistant the best way to use ChatGPT. The traffic assistant actually has to use it in order to figure out the best way to use it. And that kind of, I don't know that it's counterintuitive necessarily, but it is very different from here's the piece of software and how you use it. It's more, here's a tool. I kind of want to see how you use it.
And in a way, it's doing sort of a lead user assessment, right? And making some assessment as to whether or not there's a way to make that product fit better, right? Like you're seeing somebody who's hacking things together, trying to figure out what to do, uploading, downloading, giving different prompts and learning in that journey. You're starting to think, okay, this is a lead user. I want to see how they apply it, right? And that lead user gives you a set of problems they're trying to solve with it, right? And then you see if it's a big enough problem to solve for the rest of that department or for the organization at large. That's how I'm interpreting what you're describing. It's kind of a lead user strategy. Go find the people who aren't afraid about how bumpy it may be because they're getting some benefit out of it, and then figure out how to extrapolate from that benefit.
Quite explicitly, with one twist, which is the best way to learn how to use ChatGPT is to ask ChatGPT. This is the first piece of software we ever had, and it doesn't matter, ChatGPT, Claude, whatever. Like, the best way to use it is to ask it how to use it. And that's like getting people's minds around that, like, was really tough in the beginning, because it was just like the first thing everybody should do, and everybody should do this. Like, I've done it. I'm sure you've done it, right? You go to OpenAI or Gemini or whatever your chat of choice is, and say, this is what I do. I'd like you to help me do it better. How can you do that? and it will tell you. It's amazing. And more often than not, it will tell you in a useful way. And it sort of begins with that. And then you find your champion, and then you find your power users. And the combination of the champions and the power users, you've got your evangelists and whatnot. But like you've got to kind of get people using it before you can figure out the best way for those people to use it, it took me a while to get my mind around that. But
yeah, no, it makes total sense. When you kind of look back across your career, what patterns do you see in the kind of opportunities that you're likely to be drawn to? Like what are the common threads? You've gone through a lot of platform shifts and a lot of technology innovation periods, right? Like I said, software to the internet, and now obviously AI is another shift, and from broadcast platform to digital platforms. You're seeing a lot of technology shifts. What is it that you tend to gravitate to as an innovation opportunity? What are the patterns that you see, or are there patterns? Is there anything that's a through line that you'd pull?
I mean, there's a few through lines. Like, I don't like to do reruns. Like, if I've done it before, I'm probably not going to do it again. Right? We built a subscription service back in the day. I'm probably not going to do that again because I already did it. And we did it really well. I don't think I could do it better. So my last job, I spent 2 weeks a month abroad and 2 weeks at home. And I'd often find myself in these weird cities by myself because the sales team went home because they had shorter flights. And I would go walking around, and I would basically leave the hotel, and whatever caught my eye, I would walk towards it until I figured out what it was. And then I'd find the next thing that caught my eye, and I'd walk towards that until I figured out what it was. I did this in Amsterdam once for like 18 hours. And my career has been a lot like that. I see something that I think is interesting. It sparks my curiosity.
What about it, though? Are there traits? Are there attributes? Are there some commonalities in those things that spark your curiosity? Or is there something about how they disrupt some industry or domain? Or is there something about?
Like, I think it's that. I think it's how I think they're going to affect the things that I'm most focused on. Like, I've kind of lived at this kind of intersection of media and technology for a very long time, right? Like in college, I had a very large movie collection that was all categorized in a Lotus 123 database, right, with metadata and everything else, right, long before anybody knew what metadata was. And so, the way that media and technology would converge and interact has pretty much just been where I have lived. And everything that I've seen that sort of sparked that kind of curiosity or sort of desire to kind of like understand it more, get into it, work with it a bit. It's all something that's going to make a major change there. Like, I remember the first time I saw TiVo pitched, right? And the DVR was not a thing. And I just thought, that's going to change how people watch TV. I need to figure that one out. First time I saw streaming, same thing. First time I saw Slingbox, the remote capabilities. Like, you see these things and you go, well, that's going to change. That's going to change the way people think about things. And those are the things that I want to sort of dive into minimally to just sort of get to a point where I feel like I actually understand it. And sometimes to find a business opportunity, but like, it's mostly that curiosity. It's mostly that, okay, that's the shiny thing outside the hotel. I'm going to walk to that until I understand it better. And then maybe I'll keep going, or maybe I'll sort of move on to the next thing. But, AI was one of those things that you just sort of like, it was pretty hard to not recognize that was going to be an overwhelming wave. And I don't think I was particularly early into it. And looking at how it's developing now, I think we're all still very early. Like, I think it's still that 6 months versus 10 years thing. We're still very much in the 6 months. The 10 years is going to be, what that looks like 10 years from now, wow. But we're still in the first 6 months, effectively.
Not going ahead 10 years, but what if you look ahead 5 years? What do you hope companies will understand about this moment that maybe they're missing right now? What do you feel is sort of the aha for you that not everybody has really grasped?
It feels like, I don't know if this is true or not, there's not quantitative, but it feels like 80% of the conversations around AI are around how we can do more with less. Right? How we can use the technology to have fewer employees, how we can use the technology to have more streamlined process. But it's all some version of, can we do more with less? I think the opportunity is as much about what are the new things we can do that we couldn't do before. And I think 5 years from now, that's what you're going to start to see. So you're going to start to see from the pharmaceutical companies, they're able to sequence things at rates they've never anticipated before. So personalized medicine is now much closer than it was 3 or 4 years ago because they have AI tools. So what are and that's to some degree, that's a fairly predictable one, but what are the unpredictable ones? Like what happens when this gets in the hands of a creative person who would otherwise be somebody who developed a video game? What's the thing they actually make? And we still haven't even seen the hardware devices that go along with this, right? What's the thing that OpenAI is building with Johnny Ive's company? Nobody really knows. There's a lot of presumptions, a lot of rumors out there on the internet. But these devices that are always recording, always creating context, always collecting the information about your life, and presumably giving you some downstream value for that. How do those affect storytelling? How do those affect content consumption? How do those affect all of these other things? I think the upside case is the thing not enough people are thinking about. Everybody's, feels like every conversation is how do we do more with less? Fewer people, fewer process, fewer SaaS services, fewer this, that. But what's the upside? And then the last bit is, from the open claw stuff that happened over the last couple of weeks, I think the impact of that is going to be profound. Like if you look at what they're doing, these little molt bots or whatever, I need a CRM. So they code one. And they have a CRM that's coded specifically for the task that you've asked that agent to do. Not Salesforce off the shelf, customized with 17,000 consultants. But it was just built for this purpose. It's the only reason it exists. And it was built overnight for free. And it'll be maintained. It'll be rebuilt whenever you need it to be rebuilt. And so like these little agents that are making their own code to like make the work easier, that's a different way of working.
I really appreciate your perspective on all of this. If someone wants to learn more about you or get in touch with you, what do you recommend is the best way to, see more about your work and maybe learn some of the things that you've brought to the market?
Probably LinkedIn. I don't know. I'm not particularly public these days, but probably LinkedIn.
Thanks, everyone. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you for listening to What If with Leslie Grandy. If you're interested in learning more about creative leadership, or you're just looking for a way to build your creative self-confidence and agency, check out my book, Creative Velocity, at lesliegrandy.com/book and start turning your ideas into action.